All right, good morning everybody. It's been a big week for the Buzza family and a big week for our church too. I'll get to that in just a second. I got to tell you a little bit about what's gone on in our family this past week. This week, my middle son, Connor, graduated from high school. And ironically, he did his schooling through distance learning, but he was able to have his graduation together. There was a graduating class of less than 50, and they did a great job of spacing everybody out. And it was so much fun to honor him and watch him do his things, see his friends, and just be in this point of celebration. It is a big, big moment for our family. Also, July 3rd, Emily, our youngest, got her L. So you've been warned. The roads are just a little less safe than they once were. We've already had some fun adventures in the pilot, but that's been happening this week. And then we're also looking forward to celebrating Carolee and my 26th anniversary. So we're going to get away for a couple of days next week, and we're excited to celebrate that. The beautiful part, going back again to Connor's graduation, is we were able to take a moment because Connor's cousin, my nephew Caleb, also graduated. It was the first time the Keating side of the family has all gotten together, sort of. We were somewhere indoors, outdoors. We really kind of spread ourselves out. But there's something really beautiful about reuniting the family. And we were able to do that last week. And it makes me long all the more for the day when we'll be reunited as a family. And I've got some good news, some big news about that. We have set a time where we're going to start to be very intentional about meeting face-to-face, about bringing and inviting people to our new location at Calling Finley Place. And it's the weekend after the Labor Day long weekend, the weekend of the 12th and the 13th. Stay tuned for some exciting and important announcements so that you have an opportunity to sign up to be a part of this momentous relaunch of Northridge Church. So that's some of the things you can look forward to. As far as the week we're transitioning out of, we've got some big news. On June 30th, we handed our keys in at the hub. We are no longer leasers at the hub. And this week, Kevin Jordan sold our setup truck. So there is no turning back. We are all in for this move to Calling Finley Place. In fact, this past week, as our staff, we met here in the building. We don't have a big staff. There's 7 of us at the time. And we spread out in a circle, and there's just something beautiful to being together. And we kind of committed to these next 2 months of getting the building ready to host the people who want to meet as the church again and be a part of things in a face-to-face way. We're going to get lots of practice in the meanwhile. Today is an example of that. I came to you from here last week, from the stage of Calling Finley Place, and we're here again. We're going to be doing SNL worship from here again. The SNL message is from the stage, and so we're getting more and more practice at being in this space, and we really want things to run smoothly so that when you're here, it'll be ready for you. But until then, we're going to carry on with our summer series on getting there, featuring these teachable moments. All right, it's week 5 of our Getting There series, and we've just jumped full on into summer. It's July 5th, and we're going back into Deuteronomy, and you're going to find that this sounds a lot like an earlier passage that we chewed on. In fact, it reiterates something that's already been said, but it's important stuff. In Deuteronomy 11, verse 19, it says this: "Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed, when you're getting up." So the question this week is, what do you find easiest to talk to your kids about? And what do you find the hardest? We all know that some things are they're very easy to talk to our kids about, and some things are a little more challenging. Let's hear from our panel to hear what was tough and what was easy for them.
So the easiest is whatever they're interested in. Right from really childhood, if they were into G.I. Joes or they were into Barbies, I could get conversations going that way. But there was always a time when I would try to bring in some kind of character building into and sometimes they would get it, and other times I don't think they did. The hardest was when there was disobedience or lying was discovered, because that had to be dealt with, and that's when I turned it over to the big boy.
The easiest part with our kids is we had a no-holds-barred dinner table. Any subject was okay to talk about, whether it be sex or spirituality or sports or school, anything was game. So that was the easy part. I think for me, the hardest part of, of conversation? Yeah, the hardest part of talking to our kids was when they got into their teens, and as you know, teenagers know everything. So it was very hard to tell them anything. So I found that I had to kind of move up from telling to suggesting. And then another level from suggesting was wondering out loud. So those were sort of the strategies that Carol was better at talking to them, but for me, those were my steps: telling, suggesting, wondering out loud.
I hate talking about Pokemon. He's got so many visions. They'll just have these imaginations. They're going on and on. They're telling us these plans. They've got these schemes to build a base. It's going to have a tunnel that runs into the neighbor's yard where they're going to have a slide, and it's going to have a flamethrower, and it goes on and on. Okay, that's enough. All right. Oh, you've barely even started. Okay, there's more to this.
Like when you took Caleb out to get the kayak.
Oh, and
like
he just talked for an hour straight about this vision of his. So that's a bit mind-numbing.
I think our kids are young enough that there's nothing really hard to talk to them about yet.
No.
Like we talk about everything at this point.
Yeah, we talk about everything.
And we try to be pretty open about talking about things and providing opportunities. The hardest part is getting a word in edgewise.
Once they get started.
Yeah.
It's hard. The hardest thing to talk about is you and I getting to talk at the dinner table. Doesn't happen because the kids are all just.
Well, I'm going to change the question a little bit.
Of course.
But I think we're a good team, and we both have strengths and weaknesses. And so there's some things that are really easy for me to talk to the kids about, and some things that are easier for you to talk about. So the whole sex talk, that was definitely Tawny. You started that early, and it was good because I didn't really feel comfortable doing that. I think there's other areas where I would find easy to talk to the kids, and I think that's all part of parenting, not just talking, but the certain times of discipline or certain different roles that we have. We can each take them and do what works best for us.
Totally. I find a lot of things quite easy to talk about, especially if it has structure and order to it. So having those conversations about development and how your body's changing, no problem. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. There's not a lot that makes me uncomfortable. But what did, or what I found really hard was if it was something that they were very angry about. So if you're needing to have a discussion and you're getting a very heated response, or there's a lot of anger involved, because for my personality, when I'm faced with that, I will tend to I can escalate. That's back to the team thing,
right.
Whereas Ryan would stay more calm. And so I think that different topics, of course, but that would be what would be more hard for me in talking with our kids. And that, do you have anything else to add
No,
to
I
that?
think that's
I
good.
think that's good too.
For me, the easiest is when we have good times, bringing up memories from their childhoods and also from mine, and yeah, just reminiscing about the good times we had with Henry as well. And yeah, even talking about those hard times when he passed away have been actually quite a blessing for us too, even though it still hurts like stink. I guess the hardest thing for me to talk about is mistakes I've made. And as any parent, I certainly have made mistakes. And I find that pretty hard to admit sometimes.
There is no easy, there is no hard. It's just all questions.
We just talk. We just have always just talked, whether it's hard or not. So I don't know that I would pinpoint anything that's hard.
Like we've heard from people say that it's hard to talk to them about sex with their kids. Never.
Well, we haven't found that.
No. Yeah, the kids are disgusted sometimes and whatever else. But one of the best things that Shanna held, because Shanna was at the home a lot when the kids were growing up, is there was no question that was out of bounds. Now there were times where Shanna would say, "That's too old for you," and a really dumbed down answer.
I have to think about that. That caught me off guard. And so and the truth is I have to think about that. I don't know the answer to that right now, but I'll give you an answer to that. But we just always said there was never a question that I wouldn't answer. And I'm sure not everybody's going to agree with this, but I just have always felt like if they ask me something and I choose not to answer it, they're going to look for the answer somewhere else. And I would rather that I influence that answer. And so there's never been a question that we have failed to answer. Some of them have been tricky and shocked us at the time that they came. And so I will say that if you're thick with littles right now, that there are situations and questions that come so much earlier than you would have thought that they would come. And sometimes that's super scary and alarming, but the truth is there's nothing that there's so many resources now, whether it's somebody else in the church, talking to one of our pastors, honestly,
Someone in your home group.
going to the home group, our youth group leaders are, we just have amazing resources now, and I feel like there really isn't anything that we can't kind of tackle.
Yeah, and the one we're not. Please understand, we're not painting a perfect picture here. The one that we're struggling with right now is our is questions about how do I find the right mate? How do I know that they're the right person? And that one is extremely difficult and hard to answer. There you go.
Just about
Right. What do you find easiest to talk to your kids about, and what's the hardest?
I don't know if we're reading this question right or wrong. For us, if there's something specific we want to talk to our kids about, but they're not ready to listen, then it's really challenging. They need to be in a mood to have a conversation, in the right place, and it almost has to kind of happen organically, and where they're kind of leading the conversation a little bit more.
The perfect conversation storm.
Yeah.
No distractions.
To me, when I think of this, there was a time at school where they were feeling, or the teacher was feeling, that one of our kids was really focused on death and darkness, and it had followed the death of a great grandparent, and so I guess there was a lot of drawings, and so I was having a hard time getting that conversation, like getting him to actually talk to me about it. And so we were driving one day in the car, and I said, you know, you draw a lot of about dark stories, and he likes villains. He's never seen a Marvel movie, but yet he's a big Thanos fan from the Avengers, and he's a big villain, and who the boys know the story, and how Thanos wants to conquer, I guess, eliminate.
Yeah, he wants to weed the population of the earth.
Yeah, and yet this is who our kid really thought was pretty cool. So in our conversation, I said, "You really like villains, and you know, I'm just wondering why is it that you like villains so much?" And I almost drove off the road as he answered me, and his response was, "Well, if we didn't have villains, if there wasn't bad, we wouldn't have superheroes. We wouldn't have the need for good." And he proceeded to explain to me how if we didn't have diseases, we wouldn't need doctors and hospitals. If we didn't have fire, we wouldn't need firemen. He went on. There was a few other examples that I can't recall it right now, but so he proceeded to explain to me, though, how we, in order to have one, we need the other. There has to be a balance. And he was 6, and that was what made sense in his mind. So to him thinking that this villain was cool was not an evil or a dark thing. It was just the balance of having the heroes and the villains. And so it made sense to him. Whereas an adult, because we know the stories differently, we, I think, sometimes read so much more into it. And so I think sometimes with who our kids are, a big part of finding what's they're interested in, or their level of understanding, and having that conversation, and just taking some of, we overthink things as an adult, as I'm overthinking how to answer this question right now. But even when we were in Mexico, and we had to have the sex talk with Declan, and
the grade 3 level sex talk, which we both weren't comfortable doing anyways.
No, and they were missing it while I was at school, and so we had gone to the parent meeting to find out what parts
what all we were supposed to explain
there,
or what was suggested, I should say.
Right. Yeah. And the interesting part was, I can't get away from that word. The takeaway from the parent meeting was that just give them the straight information. Yep. We overthink it, and because we know the greater part of it, and there's so many more
the taboo and the whatever. But if you just stick to like the sort of the science of it,
it makes more sense.
Be like,
and,
oh, okay, and then walk away, and that's kind of pretty much what they did. Yeah,
for the most part. Yeah. And so I think just letting your kids lead the conversations, and they'll show you what they're ready to share, and even just putting planting that seed. Say, mention something in passing. It doesn't have to be a big serious conversation, because I said planting a seed 30 seconds after we had talked about sex. Anywho, hope that answered that question.
I can stop now.
What do you find it easiest to talk to your kids about?
Farts.
Yeah, if you live in our house, you have to be really good at talking about potty talk. No, I think our faith is pretty easy when it comes to just making it part of our day-to-day. I think when it becomes difficult is like, I don't know, I'm trying to think. I know difficult conversations are coming because we're kind of reaching that age. Right now I don't find it's hard to talk to Elliot and Ari. I'm going to exclude August because he doesn't care about anything but eating and sleeping right now. But yeah, I don't know there's any one thing that's hard. August thinks that there's hard things, but I don't know. I don't know yet. I'm sure it's coming. Probably will have to do with like friend stuff and peer pressure and trying to convey to the kids like about friendship stuff. And I remember that being hard when I was younger too. You know, probably my parents worried about, you know, who I'm hanging out with and if it's good or bad influence, but trying to get them to understand that's hard.
What do you find easiest to talk to your kids about, and what's the hardest? And so the easiest for me is to kind of find out about their day-to-day lives. And so kind of around the supper table, you know, just kind of hearing about their day. I remember when they were younger, you know, after school snack, we'd have a share, you know, you had the 2 best things about your day and the worst thing about your day. So finding the, you know, they're good at answering questions about kind of I don't want to say the mundane, but just about kind of surface activity type things. And the hardest things to talk about are areas where they might be struggling. And so I as a parent, you kind of see the areas that might be a challenge for them. And I know for myself, I want to resolve it and I want to kind of deal with it right away, but and it can come across as critical. And so it's kind of finding the times, because it's not, you don't want to just leave it or ignore it, and so it's, you know, just kind of trying to seize the moments when it will be a good opportunity to talk about those things. But it's never easy. They're usually awkward, and also because you don't know what kind of reaction you're going to get.
Yeah, the easy things are the things where there is no real right answer, where you ask them how their day was and you're just looking for what they went through. The hard things are where you're trying to steer them one way and they often don't want to be steered, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that thing about the hard things that makes them harder is that you know you're in for a little bit of time. And also it can kind of torpedo the mood in the home at the time too. If you know you gotta deal with something that's a little more challenging, you know that it's not just this 15-minute conversation, that's our phone. It's a 15-minute conversation plus the kind of the fallout from that conversation and the feelings, the emotions, and everything that goes along with that. So somebody's going to answer the phone in our house, and that's my answer to that question. Okay. Once again, you see that parenting and discipling is just not for the faint of heart. It requires bravery. And if you think this is hyperbolic, let me give you a little bit of background of why I see this as something that really requires courage and bravery. As I've shared before, Carolee and I love to work with couples who are about to be married. We do a 6-week premarital course with them, where once a week we sit down and we teach through, talk through, we discuss some of the key things in their walk to preparing for marriage. And one of the things, as you can imagine, that we put quite a bit of time into is the issue of communication. And in one of our sessions, we sit down, we talk about, we've broken it down into 5 levels of communication. And to be clear, we didn't break it down. We've stolen material from somewhere that talks about 5 levels of communication. The shallowest level is just the kind of, hi, how's it going? Nice weather we're having, how's the dog? Those types of questions that require no commitment from the person who is communicating. You're not sharing any feelings, you're not sharing any opinions. It's all very surface level. You're not going to get a lot of pushback when you communicate at that level. And as we were talking about in our teachable moment, that type of communication is really easy and breezy, doesn't require any kind of forethought. It's kind of almost just talking for the sake of talking, right? And you can go deeper and deeper and deeper until that level 5 of communication, where you make yourself vulnerable by offering opinions, by sharing thoughts that are going to get some kind of a response. And they're not always a response that you're excited about getting. Some of these conversations are really, really difficult. But if we're always living in that shallow level 1 communications, we never really make those deep connections. And when it comes to teaching, you never really break through the exterior to get to the real stuff. Like I said, parenting and discipling is not for the faint of heart. It requires bravery. When it comes to parenting and discipling, we need to be courageous. The hard conversations are, in fact, hard, but they're worth it. I know for me, one of the things that I find, I think I've shared it in the Teachable Moment this week, is that sometimes you're just done after a busy day, and you just want to sit in front of the TV, and you know that if you bring this up, if you bring up the dirty dishes in the dishwasher, and if you go there, it's going to flare up into a big thing. Or if you have that conversation about the report card, or if you have that conversation about the drive home and how your kid was rude, you know it's going to flare up, and it's not just going to be this 15 minutes of intense conversation. It's going to fill the room. It's going to color the atmosphere of your home and the environment of your home. And it's going to stick to you for a bit. And it's going to change the mood of the evening. And sometimes you're just exhausted and you don't want to even go there because you know how long it's going to take and you're going to wallow in it for a while. But I can't stress enough that when you find the conversations that are hard but are necessary, and when you take them on, it ends up being worth it. It ends up being worth it in the sense that you can deal with stuff when they're young and reap the benefits for years to come. It's not always that miraculous and quick and easy, but the hard conversations are worth it. We need to stop avoiding them. You know what? Let's bring this down to our verse for today. If you look in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 19, it says this: "Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up." This is an incredibly simple message that is not simple to do. This is saying here, there is literally no downtime from teaching, whether you're at home or on the road, when you're waking up or going to bed. There's no time off from teaching. You've seen it in the eyes and in the comments of some of our parents in the Teachable Moments. It can be exhausting. Sometimes the conversations are inane, or sometimes they're just hard. But you're really never off duty as a discipler when it comes to your children, and quite often, in the moments that you're together with those people that you're discipling, you don't get any off times. You see, there's two different types of teaching. We've got the intentional teaching and the incidental or accidental teaching. Let me tell you about the intentional teaching. This is what we're probably more aware of and focused on today. But intentional teaching is strategic. It's thought out. You're conveying an idea on purpose. This can be something that, like a challenging or deep conversation you're having with an employee, with your child, with a friend, and even your spouse. For me, when I know that I've got to have an intentional conversation, when there needs to be something I need to get across, when I need to do some intentional teaching, my go-to place is to rehearse things in the car. That's where I work out all the kinks. So I've said this before, I'm so happy for the advent of Bluetooth technology, because it can look, when I'm sitting there talking to myself, animated hands waving in the car, it can look like I'm having a very important phone call, and when really I'm just talking to myself. But my place to work out, to really fine-tune what I want to get across and how I want to get it across, is in the car. I don't know what your best place is, but intentional teaching requires some forethought. You're considering what it is you want to get across and how you're going to get it across. Conversely, incidental teaching, otherwise known as accidental teaching, is stuff, it's just kind of what you do in front of others that gets picked up. Now, this could be the way you deal with stress. People notice these things and they learn from them, especially a child. They're like, okay. And later on, you start to wonder, well, why does my kid react to stress like this? Well, you don't have to look much farther than the mirror because they've been watching the way you deal with stress. Overheard conversations are examples of accidental teaching. When I'm talking to somebody, whether it be on the phone or in real life, there are ears that are picking up these conversations. That's accidental teaching. I'm sharing who I am and what I believe accidentally through those conversations. When a decision has to be made, it reveals what's a priority for you. It reveals your philosophy, sometimes your theology. That's accidental teaching. And here's a key one. And this is one I would love to preach more about. And it's something we all need to be more careful about. The way you talk to your spouse and the way you talk about your spouse is crucial. I think my mom once told me that you should watch the way a person that you're interested in. So, for example, I should watch the way Carolee talks to her parents, because that's going to tell you a lot about the kind of relationship you're going to have. I think it was meant for watch the way a guy talks to his mom, and that will tell you a lot about how he's going to talk to his wife. But watch the way, if you're married or if you're in a relationship, watch, actually, you know what? It's the way we talk about anybody, but watch the way we talk about or talk to a person. For spouses, watch the way you talk to your spouse. Because you've got an audience just about everywhere you go. There are going to be people watching. Your kids are sponges. And they watch the way you talk to your spouse. And you better believe there is going to come a day when they mimic what they've seen in you. But something that's not thought of as often is the way we talk about our spouse when they're not around. And I've seen two very different types. I won't embarrass people with examples, but there are some beautiful examples of the way wives talk about their husbands, where they just, you can tell that they're a fan of their husband. And husbands, the way they talk about their wives, you can tell that they just love and appreciate who their wife is and what they do. But too often we see the downside of this. We see the way a spouse talks about their spouse. And people are listening. Most significantly, your children are listening to the way you talk about your spouse. And you're actually creating a persona for the person you're talking about. And you're doing it in two places. You're doing it for the people who are listening, but you're also doing it in your own mind. Do you realize, church, how we devalue people? Our own selves, we're devaluing people by the way we talk about them sometimes. Sometimes we create more value by the way we talk positively about them. And I'm not talking about the power of the spoken word. That's not what this is. I'm saying that there's something about when you say something. When I tell somebody how beautiful and how wonderful my wife is, and hopefully she's getting this and I'm getting points for saying this. But if I'm saying that to somebody else, I'm hearing it as well. And you know what? You say something enough times, you start to believe it. And you see the person that way. And the hard part is if you're constantly putting your husband or your wife down for one thing or another, that becomes the way you look at them. And I hear all the time people complaining about their spouses. This is kind of my role as a pastor. I hear complaints about their spouses, and I want to say to them, hey, this is partly your doing. You're creating this in him. This is what you're speaking over him, or this is what you're speaking over her. And you're shaping them into this person. That's a bit of a tangent, but this is all to say we've got to be careful. We've got to be intentional about even our accidental teaching, that people are watching. And the word says these opportunities, they don't turn off We're supposed to be doing it all the time. In fact, planned or not, we're always teaching. At home, on the road, when we wake up and when we go to bed. And the key is to be aware that we're always teaching. If we're aware, if we're on our game and we know that whatever we're doing, whether it's intentional or accidental, that we're always teaching. And if we attend to these things in our own lives, we can teach positively, whether it be intentional or accidental. Now, you might be wondering, what are we supposed to be teaching? It kind of says teach these things, but we haven't really talked about what these things are. Well, that's referring back to Deuteronomy 11:1, the beginning of the chapter, where it says this: "You shall therefore love the Lord your God and keep his charge, his statutes, his rules, and his commandments always." You've heard this before. This is the idea of loving God and showing your love by following his ways. That's what we're told to teach. And there's two ways of looking at this. And I've been guilty of the first one, that's for sure. The first one is if we're supposed to teach people to love God and love his statutes, love his law, the first way we can look at this is we just hammer people with the law. And I know I've been guilty of doing that with my kids. When I see that they're off track, I'm like almost like a whip, like, get back on track. Don't you know the law? This is what you're supposed to be doing. Get back on track. And we hammer people with the law. And it's even more offensive when we do it with people who aren't our own children. Our kids kind of expect it. But when you come down hard and you're constantly judging people and putting them in their place, correcting them, using the law as a weapon against them, I refer to that as hammering people with the law. And when we see in Deuteronomy, it says, "You shall love the Lord your God and keep his charge, his statutes, his rules, and his commandments." He's talking about that's a message for us. But when it comes to teaching other people, it was never meant to be a hammer. Instead, we see it modeled in Jesus beautifully. He sums up the law as loving God more than anything else. With that comes loving his law. But love God more than anything else. But then love others the way we love ourselves. Our intentional teaching, and here's where I really want to kind of bring everything back. When we're discipling, when we're parenting, when we're being intentional, everything should point back to this teaching. To love God first and love others the way we love ourselves. So when we are intentionally teaching, we should be doing it through the filter of this teaching here. Now, accidental teaching, this is just going to innately become more positive when we attend to these things in our own lives. When we're living in a way where God is first in our lives and others are second just under God, our accidental teaching will innately be more positive. You know what, church, this whole sermon series is about discipleship. Whether you're discipling your child or somebody else's child, and that child could be an adult, when you're discipling somebody in your family or outside of your family, we are always teaching, whether we're being intentional or accidental. Take every opportunity to teach a love for God and for his people. Attend to your own life so that your accidental teaching will be something worth learning. Church, I look forward to the day when we can be looking out into this auditorium and I see your smiling faces again. And until then, be safe, enjoy your weekly adventure for this week, and we'll see you next week.